Hey guys, welcome to Ragma Training. Today let us understand how to use Python as an interface to access the PostgreSQL and how to interact the data that is present in the database or how we insert the data into the database. Okay, so let us first have the environment in place. So I hope you have the PostgreSQL installed in your local machines. If not, you can look at my previous video where I have given my detailed instructions on how to install and set up the instance in your local machines. Similarly, the Python, yeah, definitely you can find on how to set up the environment through various sources. I'll try to put a video on that as well. Fine. So once we have the setup, first of all, we'll create a test database in the PostgreSQL so that we can access the test table or test database from the Python environment. Okay, so we are trying to create the database called test. Okay, so in the meanwhile, yeah, it got created and we can see here there are no tables under the database. It's just the empty database that we have. Let's look at under the schemas and again on the tables. Yeah, so it's an empty one. Fine. So let's move to the Python environment. So we are using the Jupyter notebooks. So let us open a fresh new notebook. Fine. Before it gets loaded, what library are we using? So the famous one is the Scicop PG2, which is a famous adapter that is being used to interface with the PostgreSQL. It provides various extensions. So what we typically or mainly use here is to look at how we can use the Scicop PG2 and what are the important functions or objects that we work on. The primary or the first one is the connect object that creates a new database session for us. So it gives an connections to the database instance. Once we have this, we call something called cursor on this connect, and this is used to execute the commands and queries. So once we execute, to have that effect on the database, we do the commit or rollback. So that is like terminating your transactions that are to be done. If it is like select queries, we do use something called execute methods, and then fetch. Under fetch we have many things like fetch one, fetch many, fetch all, so that we can have the data written into your Python environment. Okay, so we'll start with basic one. Okay, so I assume you all to install the library first into your local machines, that is PSY Scicop PG2. Okay, so I assume that is in place, so we'll import the library, import PSY G2. Okay, and we shall also import the pandas so that we can work on the result set that we are querying from the database. Okay, fine. So as I said, the first thing we need to do is we need to connect to the database. So that is done by creating an object called con. Okay, we'll name it as con and then we'll call it Scicop PG2. On that we are calling the connect method. So when you see the doc string for the connect method, yeah, I guess the previous one is taking a bit time. Let us wait for it to complete. Okay, so meanwhile I'll just explain you on the other features. Like say suppose this is my table or database, and you can look at the SQL query that is being used to build this database. Yeah, so similarly we have the other queries. For select, it's under the DML, and again we have the data definition languages. So we'll use as much as possible, and we'll start with creation of a table, then we'll insert the data, then we do the select query, then we update the statement, we use the update statement, then we use the delete statement at last. Okay, yeah, so the library has been run. We'll look at the docstring of the connect method, and you can look at here. So it takes up all the network components or network details, like what's your DSN, or what's your host, what's the database you're connecting, what's the username, what's the password. If you look at it, they have given a simple examples here. As the database is local for us, we are just giving only few parameters. So what is the database that we just created? It is the test database, right? And during the installation, we just gave the user and password things, so hope you remember them and use it. So Postgres is the user and password is what you have given during the installation, or the password that you are using during the accessing of pgadmin4. So this is your first object, and then we are also creating a cursor object on this connection. Okay, let's run it. Yeah, so it's done. So now let's start with create table. So we'll start with creating a table first of all into the database that we have. So the select query, the basic SQL statement which we learn, first we'll write that, sorry, this is for create, right? So first we'll write the basic SQL query, then we'll put that into the execute method that we just discussed in the start of the session. Okay, so let's have the table created. So create table, let us name it as links. Okay, so let's have some few columns like ID, which is of serial data type, and let's have a primary key as the constraint. And then we'll have the URL, which is of varchar, say suppose some 200, and yeah, it should be a not null. And then we'll have the name of the company, let's say some 100 is enough, and again it should be a not null. Then we shall have the last update. Okay, I hope that's all we have. Yeah, and then it's of a data type of date and of default now. Clear? So this is the general create statement that we write in the SQL. Now what we do is we pass this statement into a method called cur execute. But yeah, just one thing here is you pass them into the triple quotes. So that's the only thing that you need to keep in mind. So let's run this, okay, and see what is the output we get. Okay, so we see it's been run, but do you see that in your database? That is the point. So let's come here and refresh the database and look at it. Okay, so let's look at the table section, and we see nothing still here. Why is it? Because we are not completing the transactions. So what we need to do is we need to call the commit function on the connection object. Okay, now you come here and you can refresh it, and then you can find the database having a table with the columns that we just created now. So the links table, yeah, and then the columns you can see here ID, URL, name, and the last update. So now let us try to insert the data here. Okay, so let's move to the next section, that is the insert data. So what is the basic command that is used in the SQL? Insert into, we need to give the table name and also the column names, ID, URL, name, last update. Okay, but yeah, again we need to give the values. Yeah, so what is the ID? Let me give it as google.com, then it's of Google company. Then let me give today's date, that is 22nd July, or let me give it in the standard format of 2020. Okay, 2020 07 22. Okay, so this is the basic command. Now again we need to pass it to execute method. So let's pass it to the execute method, but yeah, this time in the inverted commas, that would be sufficient. So let's execute. Yeah, okay, we got an error. Okay, because I've spelled wrong in my create table, so I'll just use the same thing here. Okay, fine. So let's run it. Okay, let me instantiate it again. Okay, so now you see it's been run, but again it won't be reflecting until you do the commit operation, right? So let's first test it through the select query inside the PostgreSQL. So we'll use a query tool. Okay, so let's have the select star from links. So let's execute this. So we see no data. So but once we do the commit, it should reflect in the database. So let's come here again to the PostgreSQL and then rerun the query, and now you can see the data reflecting. But how do we insert multiple multiple rows, right? So I just have put it here, but due to an error I need to update all these. Let me do that quickly. So I'm just inserting some random values. So the thing is, we need to run it each and every query into the execute. So before that, let me come back to my Python, paste it here. Yeah, before that I'll just have my connection and cursor object recreated, then come to here and then run it. Now again I need to give the commit. Okay, so let's come back here and see the results. It's being reflected. So all the 8 records you can see here is being reflected, right? Now, so once we have the create table, insert table, this is just to show how we can connect to the database. But in the real time, you don't go and create the tables and everything, right? As a data scientist or an analyst or any end user, you access the data that is present in the database, right? So we'll see how the select query works so that we can use the existing data that is present in the database. Okay, so let's see how the select query works. It's the same thing. We need to use the execute, give the same statement what we used in the PostgreSQL, select star from links. Okay, so we shall execute this, and yeah, this is just the execution. Like how we have the commit in the reverse, we need to do something called fetch all, so that would give us the data that we wanted. Fetch all. Okay, now you can see the output. The output is in the form of a list, right? The data type, if you can see here, it's having the single brackets. It's in the data frame of data type of list. Now let's convert this list into a data frame. For that, let's first execute this. Okay, then let's create a data frame called a df and pd dot data frame. Let's give this dot fetch all as an input. Okay, now you can see the output df dot head with 10, so that we can see all the records. Yeah, but do you find an issue here? The column names are an integers with a sequence, right? So how do we fetch the column names? So there is a general query that you can use and then replace the existing data frame columns with this execute statement. So what is that statement? Select the column name. Okay, but from where? From information schema. Okay, under that, where the table name is my table name, that is link, right? So we'll run this and see how it works, and you can see the output. How do we get the output? Fetch all. So you can see the column names are reflecting. So we can use the df.columns and replace with this column names by cleaning up, right? So we'll move to the next one, that is the update. How do we do the update? Let's make the update for any of the records. So what is the general queries that we use for updating? Update the table. Okay, set, say suppose what shall we do the change? We shall change the name of the google.com to Alphabet. That's the parent company, right? So let's update the link and set the name column as Alphabet. Okay, but yeah, again we need to provide the conditions, right, where the id is equal to 1. So this is the query. So let's pass it to the execute statement, execute method. Okay, yeah, so there's an error, that's because, okay, done, fine. Now again we need to do the commit so that we can see the reflection here. So let's run the query and you can see the name has been changed to Alphabet, right? And now let's the final do the delete statement. With that we can complete this section of understanding how to interface with PostgreSQL from Python. Fine. So how do we do the delete statement? In the select query or in the SQL language, we write delete from links where id is equal to 1. Let's keep the same thing which we just created. So let's push that into execute method. So it should be in the inverted commas or in the quotes it's called. Okay, so let me execute this. It won't reflect here. We need to do something called comment, right? So let's come here and see, and you can see the Alphabet or the id that we created just got deleted. Okay, so once we finish all the executions, okay, so once you fetch the data into your project, the thing that you need to remember is to close the object that you have created, that is your connection object and the cursor object, so that we can avoid the data leaks. Okay, so let's do that. Connection.close, cursor.close. So that would be a neat maintenance of the database that you are accessing.